Good morning, everyone, and welcome back for day 2 of our annual conference. We have 2 papers in the morning and 2 papers in the afternoon, and we start with Hanspeter, Kriesi and Waltraud, Schelkle, a paper on exploiting porous boundaries, EU conflict management and crisis containment through externalization. So we do, like yesterday, 20-25 minutes presentation, Q&A, and we have a full hour. Thank you.
So welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here at an early start. I will present Hanspeter. I thought it's better if we don't split it, but later he will obviously is one of the authors together with our colleague Kate Alexander-Shaw, who has majorly contributed, especially to the theory part. He will participate in the question. So it's sometimes easier to get the argument first out there, and then that helps you with orienting yourself in the nitty-gritty of the empirical section. We think in the mid-2010s, I noticed when we do our 3 cases, these crises, refugee, Brexit, and last bout of the euro area crisis, they accumulated and escalated not just around policies, but it was actually a questioning of the polity itself, its border regimes, the extent to which it gives solidarity to struggling and impoverished member states. And at that point, to maintain the polity, we think the EU sought recourse to externalization, to push the problem beyond borders or to the local level. I will give you a clearer definition of this, because it could just not solve the underlying hard policy problem, had tried, had failed, and then took recourse to what we call externalization. And we analyzed this in these 3 cases to argue that while this seems to be ideal, if you can't solve it, make it somebody else's problem, right? We don't think it is really a very helpful strategy for the EU to deal with the problem, to not take responsibility by internalizing it. It can take out the heat of an escalating politicization, as we call it, but it does create regions, concerns, political concerns that become peripheries in the Lakatoshian sense, in an epistemological sense. Their concerns are shown to be second order, ignored when it is necessary to preserve the core. And we think in a union of formally equal member states, that is not a strategy you can sustain. They will not be quiet about it. They will become irritants. They will destabilize the solution. And of course, we have, for example, the refugee crisis, Hungary and Poland in mind. So briefly, the theory. We start from what in particular 2 authors, Stefano Bartolini from here and Maurizio Ferreira, who you saw yesterday, our other principal investigator on the SOLID project, called Rokkan's master tension, to distinguish his theory of state building from Tilley's bellicist theory, which is arguably more famous. And the point there is, when you apply that to the EU, you say you always have a tension between closure or actually between opening and loyalty. In a way, the building of systems of loyalty, that means political participation rights, voice channels that open up, and social security, public goods that are provided for you. Building such systems of loyalty require some closure. You cannot do that for the world. You have to say this is for the community that typically also has obligations of compliance. Military service was historically one of them, but also paying for them, right? And so when you then open up national borders, as you do with the EU, and the EU itself has quite porous boundaries, as we talked about yesterday, territorially and functionally, then that will lead to political destructuring, this weakening of voice channels, weakening of systems of loyalty, and that was the point of Bartolini in particular, without replacing this with anything at the EU level. Maurizio would, of course, Ferreira would be particularly interested in welfare state building, social security at the EU level. And has not been forthcoming very much. Externalization then is, in a way, asserting harder borders than the EU normally has and shifting it across them. Outsourcing, in a way, problem solving to some neighbor, or actually to the local level, so that it is out of this national EU interaction. In Rokanian terms, it would be choose Rokan-Hirschman type thinking. It is you choose exit, you push the problem out and assert hard boundary, reclose without the problem, so you hope. Now, Albert Hirschman has told us what the problem with this is. This is an article where he talks actually not so much about organizational, but systemic problems, and says, just like in markets, when clients leave the market because the quality of the good is not great, you don't get feedback to the organization, and you don't get feedback to the system if you push it out, and that damages your capacity for reform. The status quo that couldn't deal with the problem will stay. We have, in the process of writing this, I think, discovered that one could possibly say, and this was particularly a contribution that Kate made, is that this externalization always leads to some peripheries. Those who are by saying, oh, we are not solving with this, we don't solve this internally, we don't take responsibility as a community for this. Their concern with this is therefore peripheralized. And if you will, in the Rokanian theory, that means there is a restructuring going on, contrary to what Bartolini and Ferreira said, but of a very problematic sort, because we think the periphery will not suffer quietly. Right? They will become this irritant I already talked about. So if I would want to put it as a research question or a puzzle, one would say, if it is actually predictable that you cannot easily externalize hard policy problems, I'm really talking about fundamental policy problems. Take refugees or humanitarian migration, which is simply an obligation that every member state has to accept, and they deal with it for many years and can't solve it. Euro area problems and Brexit, I will talk about each of these hard policy problems. When you then could actually anticipate that this cannot be easily externalized, why does the EU then even take recourse to this second best strategy at best? Now, there could be two explanations. One is power asymmetry, and we think that is a plausible one, and we will take cases in which that is a plausible explanation, right? Germany and France, as always, setting the agenda of anything, and perhaps recently, by the mid-2010, they openly took to threatening with externalization as one option. France, in particular, with respect to Brexit, Germany with respect to Brexit. Their internal problems, their French and German internal domestic problems will set that agenda and will dominate any solution that suits them best. That's what a power asymmetry hypothesis would say. And the Commission is then usually pushed to the side or instrumentalized to be the handmaiden of that solution that the powerful prefer. Now, while we think this is a plausible one, it cannot count for a few things that we find important for the EU polity as a more complex thing than this power asymmetry hypothesis can capture. We have repeatedly observed in these crises that we researched that even powerful countries, i.e. France and Germany, must get a coalition on board to stand a chance with their agendas. Not least because the two are actually not always so aligned from the start. Once they see where they could compromise, yes, they do then push that forward. But that already means that they have basically aligned coalitions of their own that are not the same, have no overlap. The internal problems of other countries also therefore matter, those who are represented in those coalitions. And if they want to get this done, externalization must also be in their interest, even that may be a second best interest. And finally, to think that the Commission, yes, at every particular moment when it's really heated, the Commission may be pushed aside, but they have a coming back. And that's usually when things get normalized. And even when hard policy problems have been several times on the agenda, they have solutions of their own and they will try to channel that. So we then take case studies which are most favorable for the power asymmetry. You will see that in 2, we focus on the role of Germany and Greece, which are, of course, the cases where one could say a power asymmetry must clearly play a role here. So let's take first the refugee crisis. What was the hard policy problem? Well, the limited public tolerance, the constraining the census for humanitarian migrants everywhere, I would say, almost everywhere. We thought Sweden is an exception, but the political dynamic since then has actually brought quite, well, what can we put it, welfare chauvinistic parties into power. Now, we discussed it already yesterday. To some extent, the Dublin regulation to preserve the Schengen area makes the whole problem more tense in the EU, because each time it pitches in particular frontier states against everybody else. And now when it has become overwhelming, the destination countries, if I have understood Hanspeter's work on this with Spig and other people in the room, like Anna, they tend now to have a coalition, frontier and destination states, against the bystander and the transit states. And I'm sure Hanspeter can later say a bit more about that if you're interested. The most constrained country was after Germany had responded to a kind of take it or leave it offer from Hungary to defend the border. Had then the problem after 1 million refugees came in, that there was a pushback domestically, and Germany therefore tried a solution and really twisted the arm of member states in the council to get this quota regulation, burden sharing through. Now it won that battle, just about. Even Poland was kind of forced into agreeing to it, but it lost the war. Afterwards, member states didn't transpose, didn't implement. The whole thing never got off the ground. The next thing was what Merkel then did was to make a really 5 humiliating trips to Turkey and negotiate with Erdogan, who was triumphant, of course, that he became from pariah, he became the savior of the whole EU, and made this agreement that has no international legal standing. Actually, this is an informal agreement to keep refugees outside, that helped Greece, where UNHCR said, in these hotspots that you have created there, the living conditions are so substandard, you should not have refugees there. It solved that problem in the sense there's a very low flow into Greece now, and then it stopped almost. But in a way, it made Greece politically dependent on the goodwill of Turkey, which is its arch rival. And the two have feuds at the cost of refugees, frankly. So the whole thing is really our worst case for an externalization strategy, not least for refugees that are treated quite inhumanely and left in the lurch somewhere in huge camps in Turkey, to take only that part of the refugee problem. And the EU has lost any reputation of being this wonderful soft power for human rights and blah, blah, blah. I mean, it was exposed, its hypocrisy and its towing the line of the member states, namely defending our hard border. Brexit was predicted a membership crisis, and in a special issue that's in the process of being published in West European politics, we explain why that wasn't, even though we do believe there was a membership crisis in the making. And the hard policy problem, of course, was there is a whole contingent of member states who don't want ever further political integration, which you also can understand at a time when the EU was stumbling from one crisis to the next, and in particular that euro area crisis was creating an ever bigger discrepancy between non-euro member states, of which, after all, Sweden and Britain were part, and some Eastern European countries, that they went on and on with institution building that left them a bit out or have to join. The banking union, imagine, it was before, we never had EU-wide or euro area-wide banking supervision, which was highly criticized, but because it was a single market issue. The banking union now splits the single market. And for the UK, for Sweden, for these countries, this is a hard thing to take. And that is the problem, that is the underlying hard policy problem as I see it. The other is this political integration momentum that also creates. The most constrained actors there was, of course, the Republic of Ireland. It has very much an interest in keeping the Northern Irish peace process going, and that has as an agreement to which the EU was part, an international treaty, that there should be no border on the island of Ireland. The EU core and the Commission wanted also to contain centrifugal forces there, and we're sitting on the high horse and saying we helped an international peace treaty to negotiate with the agreement of the US and everything. So they had a kind of, this is a no-go area, this peace treaty has to be preserved. And that the British negotiators, the government, really didn't understand. They, from the start, had red lines and played a bad hand, as if they were still in a kind of two-level game with a small win set and can then dictate a solution. Well, if you go out, you're no longer part of the club, and therefore you're on the back foot. And they were on the back foot. So Britain was that problem of the UK, a very vocal representative of we should focus on the single market, was chucked out or chucked itself out. And the concessions were limited. They were also clear. I mean, the EU had always said we have limited ability to adjust to what you want. And therefore, this is the position. And you have excluded everything that could be accommodated. Northern Ireland is now in a way a periphery. In a way, only Great Britain left in economic terms, in single market terms, not the United Kingdom. And especially the Unionists South, we obviously up in arms about this. Northern Ireland benefits massively from the situation. And so there is limited push for changing that from that side. The European Commission, with its task force, has dealt with that brilliantly. I mean, come to the book launch next week or when it is with Brigitte Lafan. They have run the show extremely well and is a clear winner and has got back authority. Then a more mixed case, and I really say it's a mixed case. The hard policy problem is clear. It is not only Greece, but Greece is possibly the most problematic case. It is struggling with the obligations of membership. I think there's an objective problem of a civil service that doesn't work quite as it should for whatever reason. And the funding seems not to be the major problem because it is a well-funded, overly funded, if you will, in terms of some fringe benefits for the employees there. Clearly impoverished by 2015. I mean, Greece had a fall of its GDP by a quarter. Did you normally see that only in war times, right? But it is not able or willing to operate a sustainable fiscal policy. It had an average growth of 4%. It was way over the EU since 2000 and was never ever near a balanced budget, let alone a budget surplus. And that's clearly not sensible. The most constrained actor was after two bailout programs that allowed a default that went really a bit wrong, and they were promised a third bailout program at that point. But when they then came out, it was Schäuble, the finance minister, and said, well, it's working well, isn't it? They were adjusting, but, you know, creaking everywhere. At the same time, Germany was facing one constitutional court case after the next, mostly directed against the ECB, where the Bundesbank director was on the side of those who had attacked the ECB in the court and were witness for the opposition. It was a really difficult time. The AfD, Alternative für Deutschland, had founded. One forgets over that sometimes that there were a lot of vulnerable countries, and that included, of course, the program countries. Portugal, Spain was not Troika, but the bank program, Cyprus, and then Italy, Ireland, who were a bit out of the woods already by that time, but Italy was very concerned, even though it had never a program, and then Belgium. We forget sometimes the other high debt countries that were also vulnerable. And in a way, what the Greek referendum did, it was blackmailing the EU or the euro area with mayhem and starting this whole panic in bond markets again. And Renzi, a social democratic prime minister of Italy at the time, and the Spanish, came out against, very publicly out against Greece and Tsipras and playing this game because they were afraid. And so there were others who were benefiting from this that we forget sometimes because of this dominant role of Germany in the whole. When the council then called off this botched Greek referendum, called off the program, the second program, and said there will be no new program on the offer, the ECB suspended the emergency assistance to banks that it can allow national central banks to give. Greece had to immediately impose capital controls, and that amounts to being shut out of the monetary union for a time. For 3 weeks, they were basically not a member of the European Monetary Union. That's an externalization, and it threatens you with, this is going to happen if you try and don't make this an orderly process. The euro area in that sense has asserted itself, but at a huge institutional cost. When the COVID crisis came, ESM was dead. It was so stigmatized, so poisonous, so toxic, that Italy dared to say, and we're not taking this. And of course, as Italy, you are so big as a bond market that you can say, look, if we go down, the rest of you goes down with us. And everybody understood this. Spain was seconding them. And therefore, something new had to be found. And that's part of the motivation of the Recovery and Resilience Fund. So to conclude, this externalization, the solution of making hard policy problems somebody else's problem, we think is an unstable solution. It's never the end of it. Even in the best case, I think with Brexit, I think Hungary and Poland have learned we are much better into exit within. In other words, to not honor all our obligations, and they cannot do much against us. While when we are out, well, you know, the border regime will go up and it will hurt us economically quite severely. So it may turn into a longer-term problem of problematic restructuring, a new core periphery pattern. Some countries are then shown by this externalization which problems are of primary importance and which ones are of secondary importance. The drawbacks that in the cases we studied are so obvious that we had the question, why did the EU even choose such a strategy? And while power asymmetry has some mileage, in particular, we think in the refugee crisis, we think the constraining domestic dissensus plus the role of the Commission is a better explanation. They do not necessarily contradict each other, but ours is a explanation that fits better into our policy theory and can capture important aspects of the problem solution. Thank you very much.